So if you look at a seismograph, there's obviously a huge difference between a tremor and, the Earth just completely splitting open.
Right, yeah.
And for years, the Middle East has been this series of violent but largely contained tremors. Tension building up along a fault line, releasing in these predictable, localized ways.
Exactly.
But in March 2026, the needle just swung entirely off the paper. So today, we are mapping the exact fault lines of the expanding Israel-Hezbollah war.
And we really need to figure out how a seemingly localized conflict ruptured into this massive regional confrontation.
Welcome to Prime Stream. I'm so glad you could join us today for this deep dive. Our show is proudly hosted by the Independent Intelligence Alliance, and we have a really incredibly complex geopolitical shift to map out for you today. Well, let's start with the immediate reality on the ground right now, just to establish the stakes for you listening. On March 16th, 2026, Israel announced the initiation of a major ground offensive in Lebanon targeting Hezbollah.
And the human toll is already staggering.
It's devastating. The data shows over 1,000 fatalities and the displacement of roughly 1 million civilians due to these extensive airstrikes across southern Lebanon and the southern suburbs of Beirut.
Right. And Israel has been very explicit about their strategic goals here. They want to dismantle Hezbollah's military capabilities, push their fighters north of the Litani River, and establish a permanent buffer zone.
And to achieve this, they're systematically targeting key infrastructure. I mean, they are taking out bridges to sever supply routes.
Yeah, that targeting of infrastructure is critical. It tells us this is not just about pushing fighters back.
Right.
It's about permanently degrading their ability to sustain a long-term campaign.
Right.
Basically, Israel wants to isolate the battlefield geographically.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if you are listening to this and wondering how a formal signed ceasefire in late 2024 dissolved into a regional ground war practically overnight.
Yeah, it seems sudden.
Right. The answer isn't actually in Lebanon. We had this relatively dormant volcano, so what finally caused it to erupt with such force?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the geopolitical tectonic plates, they didn't shift in Beirut. They shifted in Tehran.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, the catalyst for the March 2026 eruption was a massive strike just a month prior.
In February. Yeah.
Exactly. In February, a joint U.S.-Israeli operation resulted in the killing of Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei.
Hold on. I mean, killing Khamenei is obviously a massive event.
Unprecedented, really.
But Iran has a deeply entrenched system designed to survive the loss of a supreme leader, right? They have the assembly of experts. They have protocols for succession.
That's true, yeah.
So why did his specific death trigger Hezbollah to just instantly flood the border with thousands of deployed fighters?
Because Khamenei wasn't just a political head of state. He was the ideological and strategic anchor for the entire axis of resistance.
Okay.
Hezbollah's relationship with Iran isn't just transactional, it's foundational. So Khamenei's death threatened the perceived deterrence of that entire network.
Meaning Hezbollah couldn't afford to just sit back and wait for a new supreme leader to consolidate power.
Precisely. They had to demonstrate immediate, overwhelming force to show that the Axis was still fully operational.
Which explains why they launched those massive rocket barrages into northern Israel.
Exactly. It was a projection of unbroken capability. But that, in turn, forced the Israeli airstrikes and triggered this renewed ground offensive we're seeing.
So Hezbollah formally enters the expanding regional war as a show of force. But to really understand the mechanics of this 2026 surge, we actually have to back up a bit, don't we?
We have to look at how severely degraded Hezbollah was just a year and a half prior to this.
Yeah, the sheer scale of the hit they took makes their 2026 offensive seem almost mathematically impossible.
You're referring to September 2024.
Exactly.
That month fundamentally rewrote Hezbollah's internal architecture.
Right. The cycle really kicked off back in October 2023, following the Hamas attacks and Israel's invasion of Gaza, which prompted Hezbollah to start firing into the Israeli-occupied Sheba farms.
Right.
But September 2024 was the decapitation strike. Israel assassinated Hezbollah's Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah.
And concurrently, we saw that unprecedented intelligence operation.
The pagers, right?
Yes. Hezbollah's pagers and radios literally exploded. It wiped out a huge swath of their mid-level commanders.
It's just wild to think about.
It was a masterclass in organizational disruption. Israel didn't just target the top. They eliminated the crucial middle management layer that actually executes orders on the ground.
And they did it by weaponizing the very communication network Hezbollah relied on.
Exactly. This pushed the fighters away from the border, secured key southern areas for Israel, and essentially forced Hezbollah to accept the November 2024 ceasefire.
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. I mean, if their pagers and radios literally exploded, creating this massive internal paranoia about any electronic device.
Absolute paranoia, yeah.
How do they communicate to rebuild?
Yeah.
If you can't use a radio, a phone, or a pager without fearing it might detonate or be tracked, how do you restructure an entire militant organization?
During a ceasefire, no less.
Right. While Israel is still conducting near daily airstrikes, are they just reverting to, like, burner phones?
They couldn't even trust burner phones. They had to revert to entirely analog, human-to-human courier networks.
Wow.
And this is where Hezbollah's unique structure becomes its greatest asset. They are not just an armed group. They operate as a state within a state in Lebanon.
Right. They run hospitals, schools, municipal services.
Exactly. Their roots are deeply embedded at the neighborhood level.
So they're essentially using their civic infrastructure to mask their military rebuilding.
Precisely. When the mid-level commanders were taken out, the vacuum wasn't filled by strangers dropping in from the top down.
It was filled locally.
Yes, by individuals already embedded in those communities.
Right.
They used the cover of the ceasefire and their deep socio-political integration to quietly repair their command hierarchy.
And replenish their rocket arsenal using basically underground analog communication.
Yes, systematically.
That adaptability is staggering. But it brings up a massive logistical problem. Rebuilding a command structure with local couriers is one thing.
Right.
Smuggling in thousands of heavy rockets and advanced munitions is another entirely. And right at the exact moment Hezbollah was trying to rebuild in late 2024, they lost their primary supply line.
We need to talk about the total collapse of Syria.
We do.
This is arguably the most severe structural shift in the region's recent history, and it happened almost simultaneously with Hezbollah's internal crisis.
Tell us about late 2024.
Well, an insurgency led by Abu Muhammad al-Golani, heading up the group Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, launched a military operation that swept through Syria with terrifying speed.
The numbers in the intelligence reports are hard to process. Golani captured Damascus in just 12 days.
12 days.
The government of Bashar al-Assad collapsed entirely by December 2024. How does a heavily fortified capital, backed by a regime that survived over a decade of brutal civil war, fall in less than 2 weeks?
Because it wasn't the regime of 2015 anymore. It was a hollow shell. You have to look at the macroeconomic and geopolitical distractions of its allies. Russia, which was Assad's primary military backer, was entirely bogged down in the Ukraine war.
They had stripped their Syrian bases of vital hardware and personnel, right?
Exactly. And Iran, as we discussed, was facing its own severe strategic constraints and bracing against Israeli pressure.
And the Syrian military itself had been systematically degraded by years of sustained Israeli airstrikes targeting Iranian weapon depots within their border.
Exactly. The Syrian Arab army was financially bankrupt, exhausted, and suddenly fighting without its usual international air support.
Wow.
The board was completely clear for Golani. Once the initial defensive lines broke, the collapse was exponential.
Think about what that means for Hezbollah. I don't want to use a generic metaphor here like a highway closing. Assad's Syria wasn't just a road.
No, not at all.
It was a clandestine vascular system for Iran's axis of resistance. We're talking about a shadow network of bribed border guards, obscure desert smuggling routes, and Iranian cargo planes landing at Damascus International under the cover of night.
Just offloading guided munitions.
Right. When Assad fell, that entire vascular system flatlined.
If we connect this to the bigger picture,
Yeah.
that collapse isolated Hezbollah geographically in a way they hadn't experienced since their inception.
Yeah.
Since the early 1980s, Iran used Ba'athist Syria as the vital land bridge to funnel funding, specialized training, and heavy weapons directly to Beirut.
So the loss of that land bridge meant that when Hezbollah flooded the border in early 2026, they were entering a massive regional war with an unprecedented logistical handicap.
Their primary artery for resupply was completely severed.
So let's look at the board in March 2026. Hezbollah has no Syrian land bridge. Their command structure was decapitated just over a year ago and had to be hastily rebuilt using analog couriers.
And they are facing the full might of the Israel Defense Forces.
Right. And yet the intelligence shows they are mounting an incredibly fierce, sustained resistance. I mean, since March 2 alone, they've fired over 1,000 rockets and drones.
They're bogging Israeli armor down.
How are they managing to fight so effectively while practically starving for logistics?
Because they aren't fighting a conventional war. They're fighting an asymmetric war on terrain they've spent 40 years mastering.
Right.
They are utilizing the specific topography of southern Lebanon to negate Israel's technological advantages.
The intelligence specifically highlights the town of Qiyam. It notes that Hezbollah forces are using strategically elevated high grounds there to stall Israeli advances. Why Qiyam? What makes that specific elevation so critical?
Qiyam overlooks the Hula Valley in northern Israel. In modern asymmetric warfare, elevation isn't just about seeing the enemy coming.
What is it about?
It's about line of sight for anti-tank guided missiles and launch trajectories for suicide drones. By holding the high ground at Qiyam, Hezbollah can funnel Israeli armor into predictable kill zones in the valleys below.
I see.
They're using their limited, locally stockpiled munitions with surgical precision rather than brute force.
So they know they can't win a tank-on-tank battle.
Exactly. So they make sure the tanks can never maneuver effectively.
Which brings up a fascinating historical parallel. The intelligence points out that Israel's current 2026 objective, establishing a buffer zone in southern Lebanon, is a playbook they've run multiple times over the last 50 years.
And historically, the results of that playbook have been highly counterproductive.
Right.
In 1978, Israel launched an incursion to push Palestinian militias, the PLO, north of the Litani River. 4 years later, in 1982, they launched a much larger invasion with the exact same objective route: out the militants and secure a buffer zone.
But the 1982 invasion is literally what birthed Hezbollah.
Precisely. The Israeli occupation of southern Lebanon created a unifying grievance among the marginalized Shia population.
Wow.
With backing from the newly established Islamic Republic in Iran, Hezbollah consolidated itself as a primary resistance force.
And they spent the next 18 years conducting sustained guerrilla warfare.
Bleeding Israeli forces through ambushes and IEDs, which eventually compelled Israel to completely withdraw in the year 2000.
And Hezbollah paraded that withdrawal as the first definitive Arab victory over Israel. I mean, it legitimized them.
It really did.
And then we saw a similar dynamic in 2006. Israel went to war with the explicit stated objective of completely dismantling Hezbollah's military infrastructure.
But after a grueling month of intense fighting, Israel agreed to a ceasefire and withdrew.
So the 2006 war didn't weaken Hezbollah, it evolved them.
It gave them a profound political mandate within Lebanon. They proved they could withstand the full weight of the Israeli Air Force,
Right.
which allowed them to pivot from just a militia into the dominant socio-political actor within Lebanon's fragile sectarian system. They leveraged that battlefield survival into political veto power in Beirut.
Not to mention the conventional experience they gained later. The intelligence notes that between 2015 and 2018, Hezbollah intervened in the Syrian civil war to prop up Assad. So they aren't just guerrillas anymore. They learned how to operate as a structured, occupying military unit, coordinating artillery and infantry on a massive scale.
They synthesized guerrilla tactics with conventional battlefield mechanics. They know how to melt into the civilian population when Israeli jets are overhead, and they know how to hold a fortified trench line when Israeli infantry approaches.
So what does this all mean? Are we just watching history rhyme in the worst possible way?
This raises an important question, and it highlights the central, agonizing paradox of this conflict.
Yeah.
Israel possesses overwhelming, indisputable military supremacy. They can assassinate leadership, they can detonate communication networks, they can bomb bridges.
But Hezbollah's power isn't purely derived from traditional military metrics that can be bombed away.
Exactly. It's derived from its ideological integration into the Lebanese Shia community. As the intelligence outlines, Israel is putting immense pressure on the official Lebanese government to disarm Hezbollah.
But the Lebanese state is too weak to do so.
And Hezbollah maintains the narrative that it is the only force actually defending Lebanese sovereignty.
It's a complete stalemate of conflicting realities. Israel requires security on its northern border to return its own displaced citizens.
Right.
And Hezbollah requires perpetual resistance to justify its existence and maintain its power in Lebanon.
And neither side can achieve their maximalist goals without risking total regional conflagration, which, with the death of Khamenei and the fall of Syria, we are edging closer to every single day.
But while these two geopolitical realities collide, while leadership is decapitated, land bridges are severed, and decades of historical chess are played out in the mountains of southern Lebanon, there is a very grounded, very human reality that the data insists we acknowledge.
It is the most critical takeaway from all of this intelligence. In this relentless cycle of incursions and asymmetric retaliations, it's the civilian population that pays the absolute highest price.
1 million people displaced in Lebanon alone. Entire agricultural regions transformed into scorched earth battlegrounds.
Neighborhoods leveled.
They are the ones standing directly on the fault line when the earth splits open.
The tactical victories of either side are built on top of a compounding humanitarian catastrophe. And as we've seen with the collapse of Syria, when civilian infrastructure is hollowed out to this degree, the power vacuums left behind are immense.
Israel's incursions in 1978 and 1982 didn't destroy the resistance in Lebanon. They acted as the pressure cooker that forged Hezbollah.
Exactly.
The war in 2006 didn't weaken their resolve. It elevated them into a political titan. So here's the question you have to walk away with today as you digest all of this.
Yeah.
If half a century of overwhelming military force has consistently served as an evolutionary forge for asymmetric warfare, when the dust of this unprecedented 2026 regional war finally settles, what completely unforeseen hyper-adapted militant structure is going to rise from these ashes?
History shows us that power vacuums in the Middle East never remain empty for long. They're filled by whoever can adapt the fastest to the new ruins.
We want to thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. Navigating these fault lines isn't easy, but understanding the mechanisms behind the headlines is crucial.
It really is.
If you found this breakdown valuable, please share this deep dive with a friend, a colleague, or anyone who wants to cut through the noise and understand the real geopolitical shifts happening right now. And be sure to follow Prime Stream on your favorite platform so you never miss our future deep dives into the complex global issues shaping our world.